Welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Join us as we dive into the world of endurance sports, exploring everything from nutrition to training and how these elements shape your everyday life, both on and off the race course. Hosted by Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian specializing in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. We're here to share insights and real-world advice to help you thrive on your journey. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie, and today's episode is episode 65. And this is the second installment of our series called Mastering the Fundamentals of Running. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of the long run. So the one thing that I do want to stress is that we're not going to specifically focus on long course racing per se in terms of like the marathon or like a full Ironman. I want to bring in the purpose and the use of long runs across all distances of racing. I think that there is some importance to it even for short course racing. And so we don't want to necessarily just talk about, the typical 20 mile long run. We want to talk about the physiological adaptations that we develop by including this in our training plans. And I will caveat by saying that maybe long runs aren't appropriate in your training plan. And so we'll talk about how we build the use of long runs into training plans, athlete specific, as always. And so we want to talk about maybe bucking some of the information that's out there where it's found its way to becoming a cornerstone of training plans where it may not necessarily be beneficial for all. So I wanted to start this episode by saying we want to thank you for joining us. If you are enjoying the content that we're coming out with on the podcast, please consider leaving a review and a comment on wherever it is that you're consuming your podcast content from. Those are greatly appreciated and help us broaden the reach and make us a little bit easier to find in the ocean of endurance sports podcasts that are out there. So we thank you for that. We also made a commitment from day one to not monetize this podcast and to not bring in ads and sponsors. We wanted to keep this podcast clean and pure and talk about what we wanted to talk about regardless of outside voices. And so in order to do that, we don't get any money out of this. And so all of the expenses that come from producing and hosting this podcast come out of our pocket. But we absolutely love doing this, which is why we keep doing it. So these reviews and comments are really, really helpful to us. We also use them as kind of like a report card on what you guys think how we're doing. And that is also really, really helpful so that we can kind of judge, is there stuff that we should be doing differently, or just hearing other voices. We really appreciate those. We also have the private Facebook group trying to build out this community. This is also a location where we're starting to push out additional content and blog articles that are kind of companion pieces to some of the podcast episodes that we're releasing. So we hope that you would consider just going out and searching for the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group on Facebook, answering one simple question, and we'll let you right on in and we'll build this community, and then you'll gain access to some additional content. We are also active coaches, and we are always considering taking on athletes onto our rosters. So if you are interested in working with a coach, if you're just super busy and you just want to turn over the task of creating a training plan, finding workouts, coming up with workouts, programming workouts, figuring out how to sequence them and put them all together in order to optimize your time. If you just don't have that kind of time or knowledge, we hope that you will consider reaching out to us. It can be overwhelming in terms of trying to find and come up with what you think would be beneficial workouts because we're all time constrained to a certain extent. So we hope that you will consider. If you want to reach out to Coach Katie, you can go to fuel, the number 2, run. If you would like to reach out to me, Coach Justin, I'm at tabularosoracing.com, and we'll be happy to talk with you and see how we can help you along in your journey. I think that's about the extent of the housekeeping. It is we're recording this in January, late January 2026. It'll
Mhm.
probably end up getting released sometime in February, actually,
I think so, yeah, a
based
couple
on
weeks.
like the
Mhm.
release schedule that we've got. It is now 14 degrees here at my house. We are bracing down for snowmageddon that's coming, and it's basically
Oh,
got the whole country
you're getting snow
uh,
too, okay,
on
nice.
edge. So we're
Yeah, there's a
we're
lot.
we're forecasted to get like an inch and a half of ice to start, and then they just
Oh,
dump
no.
snow on there. So we've got the generator all primed up and ready to go, the heater
Good.
with the propane tank attached and ready for the potential of power outages. So I want to go ahead and get this thing published,
Yeah, get
get it
going before
recorded and everything else. So just
before
in case
the
I lose internet,
snowmageddon comes.
that'd be great. So
Yeah, we're
how
just in
have you been
the
doing?
cold here, like, it's finally hit January finally hit us. This is kind of normal for Colorado. It's pretty chilly. It's, I think, below 0 maybe right now, at least close to 0. So it's cold, but nothing we aren't used to. So we're not, but we're not getting snow like that. If we were gonna be getting like a big snowstorm, we have a generator too, luckily, and we all that stuff. But luckily for us, it's just me trying to figure out if I'm gonna bundle up for
Yeah.
part of my long run and go outside and bear the cold weather, or do I want to do like 10 miles on my treadmill? And that's kind of a miserable thought. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. But other than that, I'm doing well. And I did have one update. I'm going to be able to take my board certification in sports dietetics test. I did get the hours
Awesome.
for that. They said it was good. So I have to still pl like, plan it out, so schedule the test and then go take the test and hope I pass it, so it's not a guarantee, but I'm just excited to get to this point where I
Yeah.
can have that certification again. So maybe be a little more legit, I don't know. I think I've been
Yeah.
legit, but sometimes you have to have those credentials after your name to look a little bit more official, so I'm excited about it, but also now a little bit nervous because I still have a little bit of work to do. But
Is this a test
yeah.
that you actually have to show up someplace and take, or can you do it virtually?
Yeah,
Or
no, it's like a test center, so you have to show up and they have several test questions, and I'm pretty knowledgeable, but sorry, my throat, I have like a little frog or whatever. It's one of those things where, there's other parts of sports that I don't do a lot in, so, like, maybe working with, like, a football, I mean, it's not like I haven't done that. So there's gonna be some level of having to study a bit, so I'm prepared, and, there's several questions. I mean, I don't remember how many, but quite a few, so it takes a while. It's kind of a lot, so you schedule it, and I think it's probably down in Denver, so I have to drive. But I won't probably schedule it until April, just to give myself a few months to study and be prepared, and also to kind of avoid the possibility, although we do get snowstorms in April, but hoping to avoid the possibility, I would schedule it on
yeah,
a bad day, when it's, like, snowing and crappy outside, so I'm trying to avoid that, so,
yeah,
yeah.
awesome. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, well,
Now
congratulate
the
me
work
when I
now
actually
the
get the credential, now the work begins. Anyway, so that's my update. I don't have anything else, just plugging away with everything, training and all that, but yeah. So we
Alright,
wanna get
so,
started? Yeah,
yeah,
do we wanna jump in?
how do we wanna start the conversation?
Well, I thought, like, let's start it with just kind of the, how
Well,
do I
let's
put
let's
that?
define what a long run is.
Yeah, let's define,
Maybe
and then
that's
we can talk
maybe
about,
that's
like, the
this
benefits, like, define it a little bit, talk about the benefits of the long run, and then kind of we'll talk a little bit about, like, the different, um, race distances and kind of who would benefit from a long run and what long run might be for certain race distances, and then I do wanna kinda end it on the marathon, and we'll talk a little
Mhm,
bit about that sort of 20 miler that, everybody's told they have to do, and we'll dive into that last, but
okay.
that I think will be a little bit of a discussion because there's some nuance there. the history on it is a little interesting. So we can talk about how we might schedule in long runs, especially those longer distance runs for the like Ironman or marathon distance for our athletes. So let's yeah, let's start. What is a long run? I mean, what do you how do you define it? Like, because you define it more in minutes
Yeah.
versus mileage, so we can kind of discuss what that might
Yeah,
look
I,
like
I
for
do
both.
all of my training plans in minutes. For me, it helps me manage my athletes' stress because a 10-mile run in March is completely different than a 10-mile run in August.
Mhm,
So, in order to really allow my athletes to recover and manage the stress that's brought on by doing such a long effort, that's why I do my plans in minutes and not necessarily miles. I
makes sense.
also and also the argument is that the body doesn't understand miles anyway. So whether you run 10 miles or 12 miles, the body doesn't know, and it's not like it says, "Oh, well, I need to recover this way for 10 miles. I need to recover this way for 12." It understands time under stress. So
Mhm,
regardless of what the miles are, it's going to determine its needs, and the time it takes to recover is going to be based on how long that athlete was under stress. And so that's why I use that approach. I know that
mhm.
you use a very different approach where you
Kind of,
do
yeah,
your training plans in miles. Is
yeah.
some of that brought on just because it's something that's the way that you've personally trained, and you've been doing this for a really long
Mm.
time? So, is
Yeah,
this
I mean, it's
kinda
always
something where it's just been part of
yeah, for
your
as a
mindset?
runner, I think it's always been, like, a discussion on mileage. There's always, like, "Well, how many miles, do you run a week?" And I think for me, just thinking of it in miles is just always how I've done it, but that doesn't mean I don't do that. I do some combination of both for some of my athletes, so I might actually be looking at how many minutes it's taking them, like, their time, so, like, their pace sorry, gosh, their pace and I'm taking into a few different factors on that, so it's not necessarily always going to be mileage because a lot of times I might prescribe a lot of their workouts in just minutes or time based, and then they're kinda just they're whatever mileage they get, but sometimes I will do it based off, "Okay, I think this might take them about 6 miles." But I'm not actually maybe prescribing a mileage in it. Does that make sense? And then I'm kinda seeing,
Yeah,
like, okay, when they log it into Training Peaks, I'll look and see how far they went, and I'm giving them, like, a general usually, like, wiggle room, so it's not like, oh, it's a hard and fast 8 miles or something. It's like, okay, I'm guessing it's gonna take them between, 7 and 9 or something like that. So it's not always I think a lot of runners, the problem with mileage is that and this is something I've got caught into or that's happened to me, is I get obsessive about it, and I'm not thinking about, "Oh, well, this week, this mileage took me, 10 hours or whatever, like, I've been on my feet
yeah,
for 10 hours versus last what and then, maybe there's just some factors like heat or something that slowed me down a little bit, and then I'm spending a lot more time
yeah,
running that same mileage. That would definitely be a factor that, I would wanna consider. So it's still I think it's hard for runners, and that's why I think sometimes for some people, like, time-based training is better because they maybe can take the worry of the mileage out, because I do think numbers can sometimes cause obsession for people, and I know that's true for me, just being like,
mhm,
"Oh, I've gotta hit this mileage," and it still happens. I've just kind of learning over the years to be able to listen to my body better, not be like, "I have to hit 75 miles," if it's like I usually give myself a range, first of all, so it doesn't have to be the high end of the range always. If I'm not feeling up to it or whatever happens, I
yeah,
can be at the low end. That way I'm not, like, at this hard, like, "Oh, if I don't hit this exact mileage, I'm, like, upset about it." Just kinda like, "Well, you did actually do 2 miles less than that. That's still good," you know? So,
yeah,
I guess for me, it's just kind of having a range, also looking at other factors, especially for my athletes I work with. So it's not always mileage, it's also oftentimes time-based, and then I'm kind of then calculating their mileage for the week also, and just making sure that there's no huge jump in mileage or huge discrepancies in, like, how much time they're training, like, if I'm slowly ramping them up. maybe up their mileage or up the time that they're doing. I'm kind of looking at both factors so I'm not overloading them too much. So
Sure.
it's just a little combination. But I think that just is like a runner thing. I mean, I think most runners listening who have maybe been, especially those who've been running for quite a while, like I rarely run into a marathon, a runner who's like, "Oh, I've been running this many minutes." So this, they're like
Yeah.
everyone seems to know their mileage, and I don't know. I don't know if that's like a cultural thing with end running or if it's just easier to say mileage or more impressive. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know either.
It's like a badge of honor. You're like, I'm doing 70-mile weeks, 80-mile weeks, you know what I mean? Especially for marathoners.
Yeah, no, I do all mine. It's just like, you know, I did a 10-hour week. To me, that's always kind of like how I've approached it. And I don't
Yeah.
know
It's
if
probably a
maybe
better, maybe healthier way of, because
uh
if you're not like, because some runners to get 80 miles would be a lot of time because they're
yes.
just not running they're running the mileage a little slower. And there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, if they're somebody's 70-mile week, not everyone's time to do that is going to be the same. And arguably, if it's taking you 13 hours or 10 hours versus 8 or something to accomplish that,
Yeah.
that's even more impressive in a way, because you're out
Yeah.
there longer.
I also find that it's helpful for athletes that are more time restricted or time
Mhm.
conscious. I'll put it that way. If I'm working with somebody who's really, really busy and they've got a lot of demands on them, they could be a parent or they've got a demanding job or they have an odd work schedule where it's not like the typical kind of like 9 to 5 kind of thing with Saturdays and Sundays off. Then if I give them a training plan where it says we're running for an hour, then
Mhm.
they know how long, they know
Mhm,
that
that's true,
segment of
yeah.
their calendar that has already been taken.
Mhm.
If I tell them we're going out and we're running 6 miles, that could take anywhere between, 50 minutes, 40 minutes, all the way up to like an hour and 10, hour and 15, depending on the athlete, depending on their experience levels, depending on the conditions in which they're running in. So it's a little bit harder to manage time if I give an athlete a distance-based training plan over a minutes-based. Now,
Mhm.
the only time that I do distance based is for swimmers. For
That
swimmers,
makes
it's
sense,
it's
yeah.
all it's all distance
Well, that
based
makes
because
sense because you coulda it's
but
hard to
yeah,
do that in minutes, even, like, because it's, like, you're in the pool, but yeah. Yeah, it makes sense because yeah, especially for someone who's like, I kinda know, depending on what the workout is and what if it's an easy run versus a hard run. I've been running so long, I know what 6 miles is probably gonna take me, so if that's on my
yeah,
plan, I've already kind of blocked that time out knowing. But if you're not really sure, you're just starting out, yeah, that's kind of like, I don't know how long that's gonna take me, like, I only have an hour, or how long
yeah,
do I need to block off for this? And that's why in Training Peaks, I oftentimes both look at have time, and because you can in there, you can put miles and time, but sometimes I don't put mileage in the little place where you can put that metric. I just put it in the notes, like, "Oh, I just want this to be somewhere between 5 and
yeah,
7 miles," or whatever, just depending on how you feel, because a lot of my training plans are actually in RPE. I don't or rate of perceived exertion. I sometimes give
yeah,
ranges of paces I want them to hit. I give them an idea, like, I want this to be around your 10K race pace, but then it's in RPE because I tell them, "If you're having a rough day and it's a little slower than that, I just want you to kind of focus on the how f like, the exertion, like, how do you feel this workout?" So it's, like, kind
right,
of a combination of several things so that they can, of a few things, not several, but, like, just so they can kind of be like, "Okay, this is kind of the target I'm going for," so they sort of know what their pace might be, but this is how I kinda want you to be feeling during the workout, especially for their rest periods, and then overall, maybe around this mileage, but it's not a hard fast, like, it needs to be 6.5, otherwise you're
right,
otherwise you haven't done it right, so it's I think a lot of coaches have their own kind of method of doing it, but I do think it's probably if someone's just focusing on mileage and that's it, I don't know if I would agree that would be a good thing either. I think I'm kind of in
yeah.
between, So I like your method though
Yeah,
for
so the
people.
reason that I wanted to bring this up is because it has it's directly applicable on how we define a
A
long
long
run.
run.
So, whether you do your training plans in miles or in minutes, that's how we're going to define your run, not a long run, but your specific long run. And I want to make sure that I'm clear in my distinction and that I'm saying your long run because these approaches that we're going to be talking about are very athlete specific. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to be talking about in general terms. If I say that this is something that's generally accepted, I'll make sure and I say that specifically.
Yeah.
But for athletes in general, I would say, I'm looking at kind of our notes that Katie put together, and there are kind of two methods that I think that are popular, and the Hansen method and the Jack Daniels method. And no, that's not the bourbon method. There's, world famous coach by the name of Jack Daniels, and so it's not the whiskey
I know,
guy.
that's true, I always it's not the Jack
So
the whiskey. No, it's
I'm
funny.
kind of
Yeah.
curious on your stance on. I want to see if we have the same
Well,
approach on what method that we would pick. So what
I think
method
that's
of those
true,
two would
yeah.
you pick?
I don't know, I mean, I think, like, in terms of the mileage, I think for just general and this is outside of marathon. So marathon training we're gonna talk about last, that's kind of a little bit of a different approach because of the distance that someone has to cover for a marathon. Generally, I kinda like Jack Daniel's formula because it's based off of weekly mileage, so it's just, 25 to 30% of weekly mileage, so I kinda calculated if you're doing, like, 40 miles a week, your long run might be roughly 10 miles, so it's not like that's the
Yeah.
golden rule, like, you might be able to do up to 30%, so maybe 10 to 12 miles, and then so it's based off of mileage. Again, that's based off of mileage, so
Mhm.
it's looking and not necessarily our time, but you could probably do something similar maybe with time. I'm not sure, I've never done that calculation of, like, this is how many minutes you're running a week, and then 25 to 30% of that, I don't know if that equates to something similar, but I like that method because then the more the mileage, the arguably, usually the higher mileage you're going, maybe the longer distance run you're gonna be doing. So if you're doing like a half marathon or something, you might wanna do a little more, versus like a 5K. So that's kind of where I lean because the Hanson's method kinda caps it at 16 miles, but there's a little bit of maybe nuance in between that. But I would say generally, I kind of again, this is very dependent on if it's like a brand new runner who's never gone a 60 minutes before, like their long run might be 60 minutes, and that may not be
Mhm. Right.
considered a long run in the term of what is, what is a long run and when do you start to get the adaptation. But for someone who's maybe been running a little bit, they're maybe new, but they've done some races, maybe they've done a half marathon or something like that. Um, I would say about 1.5 hours or 90 minutes is kind of where I think in long run would start to fall. Maybe an hour 20, hour 15, you could kind of argue 75 minutes to 90 is kind of where that starts to fall as a definition of a longer run or long
Mhm.
run, up to maybe 3+ hours. So again, 3 hours is sometimes where it's capped for the marathon. At least that's kind of where the Jack Daniels formula sort of caps it at. And then the Hanson's caps it at 16 miles. But that's kind of my definition, and again, it will depend on my athlete, how long they've gone before, but the goal I think is to gradually get their long runs to a little bit longer to maybe 90 minutes and then more if they're gonna be doing a longer race, but that's kinda how I would
Yeah.
define it. Because again, just based off the research, we know some of those benefits of the long run aren't really happening until somebody starts to get at least to 75 minutes, maybe up to 90 of running. So
Hmm.
yeah, what I don't
The approach that I use the Jack Daniels
yeah.
approach for running.
Do
So
y yeah.
what I do when I sit down to do an athlete's training plan, I think about, how much weekly volume in minutes do I want this athlete running? And, I then take whatever that number is and I'll go anywhere between typically I won't go less than 30, but I won't go more than 35%.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like where I find the sweet spot is depending on how many runs that we can do in that week will determine on whether I go 30% or if I go up to 35%. Typically, I won't have an athlete doing more than anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours in a
Mhm.
single session. If we need more volume, then I would be more inclined to give them split runs rather
Right,
than just
yeah.
having them out there for 4 hours just trudging along. Because I don't it's harder to recover from that kind of effort, and, you know, what's gonna be the quality of that run from hour 3 to hour 4?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
what's the return on that investment? I think the return on that investment is going to be exceptionally low because by that time they're so broken down, they're so tired, and the form is starting to fall apart. You have to be incredibly strong, not just in power, but in just muscular endurance to be able to have that long of an effort and have good good quality return from that investment.
Yeah, I
I'd
think we
much
could
rather.
talk a little bit about that too when we talk about, like, because most athletes doing that distance are probably training for, like, an Ironman or a marathon,
Okay,
right? So
yeah.
maybe, like, just because I think when we talk about that, that's gonna be a good place to put, like, okay, what would we maybe recommend for someone training those distances to get that same adaptation without having to do 20 miles particularly or more than 3.5 hours on their feet, you know? So I think I love that. Like, I love that thought because I agree with you, but let's maybe put that there because I think right now we're just kinda talking generally, like, okay, what would what would long run be? And then we'll
Mhm.
maybe talking a little bit just a little bit about, like, why would we like, why do runners do long runs? Like, what would
I
or why
I
would a
will say
triathlete
I
wanna
use the same approach even if we're going shorter.
Oh, really?
So
Just
if
breaking
I
it
have
up to 2? Yeah.
somebody that's training for an Olympic
Mhm.
or an international distance triathlon, I use the same method. So it's like
Right.
30 to 35% of their run volume. Now, if I'm working with a triathlete, it's not 30 to 35% of their total weekly volume. It's their run
Right.
specific volume. I use the same approach,
Right.
regardless of
So
kind of like what the distance is.
okay, so you for their long run, you're saying? You're
Yeah,
just
for
kinda
the
doing
long
that same
run.
yeah.
And then
Yeah,
I
that's
build all the other runs around the long run. So we build the long run. That's the cornerstone of the training plan.
mhm,
And then you then say, okay, well, how many more minutes or how many more miles do I have left? Now let's allocate these to various runs.
mhm.
Different durations and things like that. So I'm a strong believer in having the short runs, the moderate runs, and the long runs. Those are the three types of runs that we'll do in our training plans and
Right,
and our approaches. And each
right,
one
and
of
it's
those has a specific percentage of total weekly volume, and then we just allocate it out. But
right.
that ensures that the long run is no more than 30 to 35%
So
of the weekly volume.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think uh, trying to think with my I mean, I have very specific workouts in there, and then in between, it's just, recovery runs, so those will typically be
Hmm.
less, whereas the other workouts I'm doing might be a little bit more time or more not even more time, just more, like, intensity, higher intensity, so maybe I'm there at the same
This
time, but
this
I'm
could
running
be
more
yeah.
minutes, yeah.
This could
So
be
it's
a
just
completely different
yeah, I think that's a
another
different
episode.
episode, almost like just
Yeah,
how we would allocate, like, the whole week with mileage and, like,
yeah,
how we kinda think about that. So, yeah, let's, like, I mean, that would be another one for our running series. I think we can kinda
yeah.
put a pin in that, but so with the long run, okay, so let's say we've gone through all that process, we've sort of built the training plan out. Like, what if an athlete comes to you and is like, "These long runs, take a while, like, I still have to be out there for at least 90
Yeah.
minutes, maybe. What is the benefit? Like, what is this doing for me?" I think let's talk about that a little bit, and then we can dive a little bit more into the benefits of that, and then, we could talk a little bit about why someone who would be doing even a 5K would benefit from it, but then I think
Right.
when we think of long run, I think we also think of, like, those longer distance half marathon and above, so then maybe we could focus on that too. But let's just go so I had put some thoughts here, and we can kinda
Yeah.
dive into each and any more that you can think of. The biggest thing I think is just the cardiovascular adaptation you get. So, like, the heart strengthens your heart muscles, increases, like, blood volume when you're doing the long run, and then also just how your body works to deliver oxygen to your muscles. Blood
Right.
volume maybe goes up a little bit. You could deliver the oxygen to the muscles faster. So there's a little bit of that cardiovascular adaptation that happens there, and that's a benefit. Is there anything I'm missing with that piece? I think for the most part that's self-explanatory.
Yeah, I think that's pretty. That's
Muscle and skeletal strength. So muscle strength, this isn't necessarily, oh, you're doing a long run and you're going to be gaining muscle. You don't really gain, you don't get stronger like you would lifting. It just
right.
increases your durability a little bit, your body's ability to handle stress. So especially if you're going to be doing some longer races, it is really helping you be able to be durable for those longer races. So when you get to the 20 miles of the marathon, hopefully you've done a certain amount of training or certain types of training to be able to carry you to keeping that pace the best you can. Those remaining 6 miles, which is usually the hardest part of the marathon, helping your like ligaments, your bones, your muscles be able to handle the strain of the running itself. And also, like, if your mileage goes up a little bit, just the long run kind of just helps you be able to have that durability for the other runs you're doing as well. And then the other thing is just the mitochondria. So that's like the powerhouse of the cell. So the long
Mhm.
runs really help, especially those long runs. That's why you do some of your long runs in that sort of zone two pace, where you're just kind of out running. It's fairly easy. You're not straining yourself too much. That's really where you see a lot of that benefit of like the of increasing your mitochondrial density is what they call it. Just having more of those little powerhouse little mitochondria in your cell, like helping
Yeah.
you burn energy and be more efficient. So that is another benefit.
I think that
I don't have any.
this is one of the biggest factors, I think,
Mhm.
for the long run. And it's one of the biggest limiters of the ability for an athlete to have a long run in their training plan. Rarely do I find athletes cardiovascularly limited for the ability to do a long run. Is it a factor? Clearly obviously, because running is an aerobic sport. It requires oxygen. But what I tend to find most often is that athletes are having a hard time with long runs because they don't have the muscular endurance or the skeletal
Mm,
strength to execute a long run, nor do they have that strength to recover from a long run.
right.
So
Yeah,
it's not
makes
the
sense.
fact that, hey, can we do a long run? It's, can I do a long run today? And can I do something tomorrow?
Right.
Because if
Yeah.
you do a long run today, but you can't do anything for 3 days, you doing a long run is stupid. There's more to it than just being able to execute time under stress for that long of a period. I'm more interested in the consistency of the training, because what I find is that athletes who require that many days off because of a long run and their inability to recover, is these are the people that get stuck. They don't see the progression in the growth in their running that they want to see, and they get stuck in these vicious injury cycles.
Right. Yeah.
So they'll
I,
find,
yeah.
oh, my ankles are hurting or my knees are hurting. And they do these long runs, and then it takes them, 3 to 4 days to recover. And then they go back to running and they're just like, oh, well, my ankles still hurt. And, my knees still hurt. I mean, this is the reason why
Mhm.
it's hurt. It's not the fact that I'm a bad runner, or you don't have the ability to recover from it and you don't have the strength to execute it.
Right.
So,
So, and I think this is where this is why you progressively, slowly kind of increase the long run. You're not like, you would never be like, I'm training for a marathon. I'm going to start my, I'm going to start with the 20 miler, right? Or something crazy like that. But also this is where what else does it? What else helps strengthen our bones? What else helps our ligaments and tendons and strengthens our muscle? Well, this is a whole other topic again, but strength training, so like
yeah.
that this is another argument for maybe also doing a little bit of strength training and progressing the long run a little bit more slowly. I think people think I've got to do 90 minutes, therefore that's where I'm going to start. Like I said, that's why I want to be a little nuanced. If you've never done 60, that's where you start. And then you build up
Yeah.
slowly. 60 minutes, 70 minutes, 80, however that progression is going to look. And then you maybe have a week where you back off, let your body recover. So when I'm building a program, it takes a while to build to a very long run. And because of what you're saying, because of the way it takes so long to recover, you have to slowly have that stimulus. And, but you don't want to overdo, if the stimulus is too high, you're really pushing yourself, then you're going to be unable to do the rest of your training, which is not going to help you. You're just not going to progress, right? Because you're going to have so many days that you have to take off or you're going to be injured. So I agree. Yeah, definitely something to think about too with the long run and why we don't jump right into it, because it strengthens, but it also can tear you down so much that you can't recover fast enough. The other one would be metabolic efficiency. Just the way we talked about. We hit this one a couple episodes. It was metabolic efficiency and flexibilities. That does help you regardless if you're doing this. You don't have to be doing fasted long runs. This is just going to happen naturally where you start to burn a little bit more fat for fuel. You can preserve glycogen stores. So this is another benefit, important benefit of the long run. And we did touch that quite a bit before, so we're not going to talk a lot about that. Muscle fiber recruitment. As you get further into the long run, muscle fibers types start to get tired. So you might actually start recruiting more different types of muscle fiber types to help you get through that. And that helps your body learn how to recruit different types of muscle fibers. Like the slow twitch start to fatigue, you might start recruiting other types, which are not going to last as long. So, but it can help you kind of your body learn how to recruit different muscle fibers to help. This is also why sometimes people do varying paces and long runs. We're not going to talk about that too much. And then I already mentioned durability, but this does help you become a little bit your running economy and just help you with resilience. Any thoughts there that I don't want to, if you have any other things to add to
I would
any of
say with the issue of the muscle fiber recruitment, there's a big genetic component
this.
to
Oh yeah.
muscle fiber recruitment. Not necessarily just the recruitment, but the muscle fiber composition that you have in your body. There are some people where you say person is built for speed, and then you try and put that person in a mile race, but they're really good at running the 400. And you put them in a mile race and they completely fall apart. The issue then becomes, well, what is the muscle composition that they have that they're drawing on? You could make the argument that person may actually have a higher composition of fast twitch muscle fibers rather than slow twitch muscle fibers. So endurance runners, where they're running longer distances, may probably tend to have more slow twitch muscle fiber than the fast twitch, because then you put them in a sprint and they can't do it, but they can run forever. Doesn't
You can kind
necessarily
of
mean
train it a little bit, but
it
not to
doesn't.
the
Yeah, it doesn't
extent that
necessarily
you
mean that
can
we can't turn that sprinter into a
into a
long
marathon.
distance runner. I don't want people to walk away with that and say, well, I'm never going to be able to do that, because we have found that muscle fibers can transition. They can turn from like fast twitch to slow twitch and slow twitch to fast twitch. It's not a permanent thing that can happen, but through training, we can bring those in and cause this transformation.
Right.
But whether it's a sustainable and permanent transition,
Well, yeah.
I don't know if
know.
that is the case.
I do think we all have different. I mean, we all have a fast twitch and slow twitch. It's just the proportion
Yes.
of. So I think that's kind of what that's saying too. Is sometimes when we're running long distance, some of our muscle fiber types might get tired. So we start recruiting from some of the fast twitch or vice versa. That, itself, I think is interesting. We could dive into all sorts of different types of training methods and things like that. But I do think that's important because during a marathon, but as you get into some of the longer distances, as those fibers fatigue, you're probably recruiting others. And so to get used to how to recruit different fibers during running, and then there's different types of workouts you can do where you're alternating maybe between faster, slower to be able to recruit fibers as well. But it's interesting. That's just an interesting aspect of it and how that helps, because the more fiber recruitment we have, arguably the less tired we might get. So yeah. And then the mental piece, I think too, was one that we
I think
didn't.
This is huge.
Yeah,
this is
that
really,
was one
really
that
big.
when I was like putting down, like, oh, we've got to talk about the mental side, because I'm thinking of the perspective of Any kind of race. I think for the shorter distance races, if you're doing a 5K or a 10K, you don't want to do a 20-mile run. I mean, the long run you're going to do is going to be sort of portioned to what your race is, but you arguably may want to be doing some 90-minute runs or something in there just to
Hmm.
kind of get some of these benefits. But I think in that case, the mental piece is, well, if I can run 90 minutes, obviously a 5K is brutal for a short period of time. But sometimes I think the mental benefit is just I'm out here running this amount. I could easily do a 20-minute run or something like that as fast as I can. So, but I think this mental piece comes more in for some of the longer races when we're looking at like half marathon, half Ironman and beyond to like an Ironman marathon and obviously like ultra. Doing the long run helps you prepare mentally because especially if your goal for the marathon is maybe 3 hours, if you can be out there for 3 hours mentally, that kind of helps you prepare for
Yeah.
the marathon because you're out there just even though you're not running the same pace, you're not at marathon pace for that full time usually. You just know you can be running for that long, and that's a big thing. You think if I can do 20 miles or whatever amount of time, 3 hours, I can definitely be out there for maybe even 3.5 or 4, even though you haven't
Right.
quite done that. Yeah, I can probably do another half an hour or an hour. So just that mental piece of because that seems like such a daunting amount of time, and even for, like, an Ironman, I mean, you're out there for a long time, so it's
Yeah.
hard to mimic that exactly. I think it just helps. I don't know, your thoughts. I'm curious if you have
I
any
agree with
more.
that. If I had to rank these benefits in terms of their importance or what I find to be more important, I would say the muscular and skeletal strength, increased durability, and the mental aspect. Those to
Mhm.
me are the three biggest benefits of
Right.
the long run. And I'm not necessarily speaking in terms of like my athlete development, but I'm speaking in terms of my own personal development. Those are the things that I've
Mhm.
gotten out of doing long runs in my own personal training plan. Now, the one thing that I will say, and I want to make sure that I'm perfectly clear on this, because when you were talking about the mental fitness, I could see where some athletes could be going. And this is not validation for doing whatever distance that you're training for. This is not validation for doing that distance in training.
Mhm.
So we're not saying that, okay, well, if I'm running a half marathon, then I want to run a half marathon in training so that I'm mentally fit for it. That
Right.
is absolutely not what we're saying because there are absolute risks associated
Mhm.
with that kind of approach. Now, there are times where you're going to be out on your run and you just start to question things because it's a hard effort. That's where I think that we're getting at is
Right. And this is
this
more hard.
ability to
Yeah.
portion out your brain and shut different voices off
Right.
in your head. That's where I find the long
Yeah,
run
that's
is
it.
most important. And I think, and I know that I'm going to say this, and there could be some people that are just going to get really pissed off, but I'll say it anyway because I want to.
Okay. Now I'm like, what are you gonna say?
If you're doing a run only race, most of these races allow for the use of music. And so you can run with headphones. I think the use of music is awesome. I personally use it. I love it. It is a great mental distraction and allows me to kind of shut off the voices that are kind of in my head telling me, you can't do this. This is a really hard effort. You can't sustain this effort. I can really draw on the beat of the music or if there's memories that are being triggered by certain songs that are coming on in my playlist and I kind of can shut those voices off.
Mhm.
For triathlon, the rules are very, very specific. There is no use of headphones. There's no use of music being played just like through your phone and just like broadcasting music.
Mhm.
That is against
A
the
no-no,
rules.
yeah.
And I find that when you don't have that distraction, you're going to have to find a way to manage the mental aspect of that
Mhm.
effort. And I'm going to say that triathletes are going to have a harder time becoming mentally stronger than single sport run-only athletes. Just the sheer fact of the ability to run a race with that distraction in a single sport
Yeah. I've never worn
effort.
headphones in a race. I don't
No?
listen to music during races. Oh, no.
Oh,
Never. I've never done that. I don't. That's like a no-no for me. I don't care if other
interesting,
people
because
do it. I
I've
just would
always
not.
used them.
And I think it's like for a long time, maybe it was against the rules. I don't know, but it's like, nope, I
Huh.
just run. I just run with my head, whatever's in my head. That's really, maybe I'm like really mentally tough. I mean, during my training, sure, I listen to podcasts and sometimes music. And obviously, when I'm on the treadmill, I watch stuff because it's boring as I'll get at sometimes. But I do a lot of runs, and my long runs a lot of times are without anything, unless I'm running like alone or really needing like this time of year. I seem to need a lot more motivation. But in the
Mhm.
summer, I'll just go run. I mean, I've done so many runs just by myself in my own head. It's almost like a beautiful thing because
Yeah.
I can like think about things and work through problems, but I've never done a race with headphones ever. So there's
Wow.
that. I don't know. Yeah,
I've never I've
maybe
never
I'm
I've never not done a run race without headphones. I've
I
always
just
had
have
them.
I think it's
And
like
it's
an old
because
school running thing. Like I don't
it must
think
be. And there are clear camps in the running
and
community
yeah,
on
I'm not
this. So
saying
it's
I'm
just like,
like don't want people to do that or like, oh, if you run with headphones, you're not a true runner. I'm just thinking I don't want that distraction. I want to be in the race. I want to be seeing what I see. Like for New York City, like that would have been a shame to have headphones on because there's so much happening, so much noise and so much music and different things in the experience. You would have just drowned all that out. Would have been like,
yeah.
what's the point? You know what I mean? So but I could see, like, certain races where it's a little more quiet, maybe less people, less things. I probably will never race with headphones on. It's just
Wow.
like an old maybe someday when I'm older. So that's interesting thought. That's an interesting
Yeah.
sidebar. I think that for me then is, like, really, like, mentally to go out on a long run, 20-mile or whatever I do, 3 hours, 2.5 hours. There's times I just won't listen to music, and then, yeah, that really gets you mentally. Because but then I have to, like, think of strategies, especially when it's getting hard, and it's kinda like these little mental strategies to get through the run of, like, okay, I'm,
Yeah.
like, 2 miles, I don't or whatever I'm thinking of, and because even when you have music on during your race, it's not like that's gonna take away all the pain and discomfort of it,
No,
you
no,
just
no,
have
no.
something to
No, it never
so you
does.
still have to kinda come up with those strategies of how am I gonna get to the next mile? You have to focus in on the mile I'm in. But I'm focusing in on just where I'm at, and it makes you very present maybe, like, because 'cause you're just trying to get through and I'm thinking my last marathon, it was kinda like I was giving myself benchmarks. I'm, like, looking ahead and I'm like, "Okay, there's, like, a bridge thing up there. I'm gonna get to
Uh-huh.
that," you know? "Okay, I gotta get to this next thing, and I'm just gonna try to maintain my pace. Okay, if I can just maintain my pace to there, then I'll reassess. Okay, I'm gonna try to okay, I think I'm okay. I'm gonna and by the time
Yep.
and this is at the end of the race, because this is when
Oh,
it
yeah.
gets tough. And then made it and I could see the finish. So it's just kinda keeping those little benchmarks, but if you don't have that experience of, like, being in a place where it's getting a little difficult and you're finding those little mental strategies to kinda get you to the end of the long run or whatever, then when you get to the race, I think you're more likely to wanna, like, give up maybe
Yeah.
because 'cause you're kind of like, "Oh, this is hard," and you haven't really, like, mentally prepared yourself for that. So, I guess
100% agree
regardless
with
if you
that.
have music on or not, I mean, I think it could be helpful to motivate you, but you're still gonna run into those hard times, during the race, and so you're gonna wanna have
Right.
something to pull from. Like, "Oh, I've been here before. I know what it's like to be uncomfortable," like, and I can pull through the ability to cheer yourself on a little bit or just know, "Okay, I've been here before. I know this is uncomfortable," trying to just kind of get comfortable with the uncomfortable and knowing that you've done that before and you can persevere, you know what I mean? Versus
Right.
getting to that point of discomfort and being like, "This sucks. I'm gonna stop and walk," or whatever, which maybe that is warranted, but I think a lot of times people kind of mentally aren't strong enough, so they kinda give up on themselves and they start walking and when they could just continue run or they slow down their pace when maybe they could just push a little bit harder and keep pushing because 'cause they're almost at the end, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
it sometimes is more of a mental thing. Not always, but I think having that experience is helpful. So, yeah, big one. I think the mental piece is a big one there. Everybody's little strategies are different, but maybe that's a whole conversation on its own is the how to build mental toughness. Any other thoughts on the benefits? I think
Well, maybe
we
that's
kind of
something that we can throw out. So if you're in the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast Facebook group, when this episode releases, I'd love for people to kind of go out. Maybe I'll post a thread in there. It's like, what are your mental strategies for when you're late into a
Mm,
race? What are some of the things that you do to break through and to maintain that mental barrier to kind of like block the pain and just get through? That'd be a great conversation in that group. So if
yeah.
you're not
I'd
in the
love to
group,
hear what people do.
jump in, please. I think it would be a valuable experience. So
Yeah, that would be lovely to hear what other people kind of do because I think that's the hard thing about those strategies is that there's a lot of different ways people can kind of do that or things little mantras people have. I'd love to hear like if you have like a mantra. I know that sounds silly, but I think that can be really helpful. Like just something you tell yourself when it's getting tough. That kind of keeps you going. Let's maybe switch gears because this is kind of what we had originally wanted to talk about, but then we were, well, let's talk about the long run in general. Like now we're getting into our longer distance stuff,
yeah,
but let's just talk about like the 20-mile long run where like for the
yeah,
marathon, because I think there's
yep,
been like recently a little bit of, there's always been a little bit of pushback because there's different methods out there, but I saw something in the, on Facebook, an article that kind of said, well, maybe the 20-mile long run isn't necessary. And so I thought this would be a good topic. First, I just want to dive in because I thought this was interesting. I was thinking to myself, 20 miles, where did that come from? What's the history on that? Who came up with that? Why is that such a critical aspect of the marathon training plan? And it's actually was popularized, apparently, this is what I found. But in the 1960s, there's a coach, Arthur Lydiard. I think he was out of New Zealand. He's a pretty famous coach for high volume training, just really doing a lot of mileage. And he emphasized that the 20-miler was what he would have his athletes do to get ready for races. So building endurance, testing fueling strategies, that late race fatigue, hitting the wall, and that mental piece we're talking about. That was where that came from. So it's been around
yeah,
since maybe the 60s, 19. I think a lot of runners have found over the years that about 20 miles, maybe even 21 or a little bit over has been helpful. So that's why I think it just keeps being perpetuated is that over all these years that we've been marathoning until now, a lot of people do find that maybe around 20 miles is the sweet spot. And so when you start to get to 21, 22, and beyond, the injury risk starts to go up substantially. And so that's why uh, it's very, very rarely, if ever, encouraged to go above 20-mile distance. And so I could talk a little bit about my own training. I have gone up to 7 miles once, but it was very slow. It was just because I was helping my friend run from Boulder to Fort Collins, and he was doing 50 miles or 100 miles that day, and I just happened to run like 27 of his miles with him, but I wouldn't ever recommend that generally. That was probably not smart, but that's where that comes from. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the history there, but it is interesting. I think the biggest thing is just maybe we can talk about what are your thoughts on if somebody's coming to you, Justin, and hopefully doing enough running that they're not just jumping into the marathon without having done any other races, but they never done a marathon before, but maybe they've done a few halves, they've done some 10Ks, 5Ks, like so they're not brand new to running, but they're like, okay, now I want to conquer the marathon. How would you decide? Are you going to recommend that 20 miler? I know you're probably going to do more of it time based, but what is your approach to that?
well, my approach is going to be dependent on that athlete's history. You could have an athlete who this is their first time running a marathon, but they've been able to maintain pretty healthy bones and muscles and ligaments and tendons. They have no injury history whatsoever. So they haven't said, I had tendonitis in this joint for a little bit, those sorts of things. Then if they have a pretty clean injury history, then as a newbie coming to me, I would probably err more on the side of caution and say, hey, we're going to do long runs. Obviously, we have to, but I'm less likely to give them a long run that's more than like 2.5 to 2 hours and 45 minutes in duration. If I find that we need more volume, then I'm going to say, what I want you to do is we're going to do an hour and 15 minutes in the morning of a quality run that's going to have some intensity in it. And then we're going to roll around maybe in the evening and do a more kind of like zone 2 effort for the balance of
Uh-huh.
it. And I would go back and say, well, what kind of miles did we get out of the first effort and out of the second effort? How long did that take in aggregate to get those miles in? And then in the days to follow, how were they able to recover from it? Were they still able to do stuff the following day? But that would be my approach with a newbie, just because I tend to be a little bit more conservative
Conservative, yeah. You don't
in
wanna
my approach
have
because
them
I
get
don't want to do
injured on their
harm.
journey,
You know,
yeah.
I don't want them to walk away from the experience with a bad taste in their mouth.
Right,
I'd
yeah,
rather them say, I feel like I was underprepared for the marathon versus going in and saying I'm overprepared and I'm not feeling healthy.
right,
To me, I
absolutely.
would
Or
much rather
injured for
have
the
that
worst,
first
yeah.
scenario. It's like, hey, I wish I could have run more. Well, then that's a place to start. It's like, okay, well then how can we run more? I don't want to have somebody say, I
Yeah.
ran a lot and I felt prepared, but I was dealing with this issue and that issue. To me, that's not a great
Yeah, I think
approach.
I'm kinda thinking, like, I want that person yeah, you don't want them to get injured, first of all, so you wanna be conservative, and I have a conversation with people a little bit in their first marathon, like, "Okay, the marathon is a challenge no matter how prepared you are for it. So just having the expectation that really for that first one, the goal is to kind of finish it. Maybe we
Mhm.
have some time range that they'd like to accomplish it in, but like to just know like finishing it is a big accomplishment in its own. And then once you've sort of done one, you have then the experience. If you decide to do another one, then you kind of know, okay, if you had, like you said, I felt like a little bit underprepared, like, or I felt like I could have done a little bit more training. Oh, that's good to know. So maybe next
Yeah.
time let's up the training. But you're not going to have most people unless they're like more elite or like have a large running background. Most people don't go into it and run really fast, extremely speedy first marathon. I mean, it happens, but it's not the majority. So I think just going into it just kind of with that okay, this is an experience. Like, let's see how this goes. And so just having that conversation with someone on their first one, I think is important so that I don't want them to have high expectations, especially because even for a seasoned runner like myself running the marathons I've done, it's like there's so many things out of our control. There's so many things that can happen in a marathon. It never always goes perfectly well for anybody, even somebody who's done 50 of them. So let's just just keep that
Yeah.
expectation, put that out there because that's the beauty and sometimes the frustration of a marathon. So I have that conversation with someone. And then, yes, I think being conservative, and I like the idea of breaking it into two. We can talk a little bit about that, like when we would talk about like alternatives to the 20 miler. But I do think like, I look at previous marathon experience, previous long run experience. Like if this person has maybe they've done ultras and they're and they're now wanting to do a marathon, like that may be a different conversation too. They've never maybe done a marathon, but they've done some longer distance stuff. So they obviously have some time on their feet. They've done some long runs to prepare for the ultra. So that would be something I would also want to consider. If they've done some previously, like then having that conversation about if they have done 20 milers before and that, like what was their long run history? What was their training like? What was their injury? I think the injury piece is big. If I have someone that is very prone to injury, I'm gonna be much more conservative with that person, like, because and then it's kind of figuring out what led to their injury. Was it doing the long runs previously? Like, what was
Uh-huh.
the injury piece there? And for somebody that's very much more, like, resilient, doesn't seem to be as prone to injury, I might be more apt to test the waters a little bit, so to speak, with their training, not a lot. I'm not gonna be like, it would depend on all the other factors, but that might be something I would definitely consider. How fast, what is their goal? Let's say they've run a few and now they have like a goal pace. Like, what is the goal for that? There's a big difference between like a 3-hour marathon and like a 5-hour marathon, and whether I would be recommending a 20 miler. And then how much like, like, because your example too of breaking it up I think works well for people sometimes who have busy schedules and have kids. Maybe they only have a few hours in the morning. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to wake up at 4 in the morning to do this. So if they have a couple hours in the morning to try to get an hour 15 to an hour and a half or some sort of distance in that morning, and then breaking it up and doing another run in the evening and having that might actually work. And I think it could work for people who have a busy schedule. and wanna still get some of the benefits of doing a longer session like that. So, just what is your schedule? Like, 3 to 4 hours dedication to a long run is dedicated amount of time,
Yeah.
and if you wanna do the marathon, you kind of have to figure out how to dedicate some time, right? So, hopefully, you have a little bit of time, but sometimes that's hard on a weekend, so and people arguably might have a job during the week, so they can't do that much time. So, that's something obviously I wanna be asking people. Any other thoughts there? Anything else that you're when you're trying to factor in things for that 20 miler? Is there anything else you're
I mean,
thinking
there are
about?
instances where I won't even actually give an athlete a long run in their
Mm,
training plan, and it's a reasonable approach.
right,
So, if I find that the athlete just has a hard time recovering from it, then I may actually increase the duration of their moderate runs and spread them over multiple run sessions, and we can
right.
still get in the same overall volume. They may go into the race feeling, "Well, I've never been on my feet this long," and so I
Right.
think that that's a confidence thing, and that's a mental
Mhm.
thing. That's not I don't believe that that is a true, like, aerobic and, like, strength thing. I
Right.
I think that
Yeah,
that's
I
just an
think it is.
insecurity kinda,
It's
like,
just
walking in. It's like, "I'm not confident
being
that I can execute this."
right.
But I've seen so many people go into scenarios like that where they weren't confident that they can execute, and the
And then they're just
mind
fine.
just
Yeah.
works, and the
Right.
body just kinda, like, goes along for the journey.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, that I think would
to
be a
me,
great approach for somebody
that's
who's
a reasonable approach, and
injury
it's an
prone
approach that
or
I've used for myself as well, because there were races that I was training for where I was having a hard time recovering from long runs,
right.
and just the pain that I would feel, like, that same day and then flowing into, the next day, and I was like, "Well, really, what am I getting out of this? Because I'm gonna have to do lower, less quality sessions in the following days because I'm still trying to recover from this long run. What if I spread that volume out over multiple runs and maybe I have an easier time absorbing that fitness and I can still get the overall volume that I need? Because
Uh-huh.
volume is cumulative, fitness is cumulative. It's not
Right.
that, oh, hey, you get a big boost of fitness from a single run. That's
Mhm.
that's not how this works. It's the
Right.
accumulation over time is what builds the fitness, and your confidence comes from the ability to consistently execute your daily runs in your training plan. That's where the confidence comes from. So, you know, that would be another thing that I would consider if an athlete came to me and said, I've run long runs before and I just have a hard time recovering from it, then I may say, well, let's try a different approach. And we're not actually going to have long runs. We're just maybe going to increase run frequency so that I can spread that volume out over more runs so that you can recover better.
Absorb and recover. I think that's a big piece is just the recovery from because if you are doing a long run, let's say you try to do a 20 miler, but it's like we said before, if it's taking you 3, 4 days to recover and you can't do the other quality sessions, you can't get, maybe some marathon pace work session or you can't get your moderate long run during the week or something, you're taking so long to recover, you have to take a couple days off. It's like then arguably you're you're not getting actually a whole lot of benefit out of that because
Yeah.
it's too much. That's when I'm like, "Oh, this is too much." So to have to sort of fit in a different way, like you're saying, spreading that mileage out more, doing the double situation, I think is a great, even if you really are like determined, like I want to get 20 miles in, but maybe your body just can't handle it. Even doing like the Hanson's method where you maybe do 16 miles in the morning and then 4 in the so
Yeah.
allowing your body to recover because I think the other problem and the problem with injury comes with some of the longer runs. We start to our form starts to deteriorate because we're getting tired,
Yes.
and that's where the risk really starts to happen because all of a sudden, you're, hunching over or you're not running, your mechanics start to falter and your the way you're running is just it's such a way that it's increasing your risk of injury because you're just not able to like you're not durable enough. You're not able to like stay strong enough to handle that. Then No, that might be something to consider. So if you're listening, you're like, I really need to get my 20 mile, but it's taking me longer than 3 hours, or 3.5 hours. And I'm like, but I really want to do that. I think spreading it, not, you can either spread it into kind of two doses of even, but I almost argue trying to get closer, like the more you can get in the morning to get you that benefit of doing the long duration up to 16 miles, and then the remainder in the evening would be an option that I might recommend for someone who is very, like, mentally set on
Mhm.
20, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just can't complete it all at once, like, that would be another alternative to consider. I just think, like, the drawbacks, I think the biggest one, we've talked about this, is just, yeah, the recovery piece, the deterioration of form and risk of injury, and just the time it takes can be a lot. Like, if
Yeah.
somebody's trying to do 20 miles, but it's gonna take them 4 hours, like 5 hours, regardless of whether that's good or not. That's just a lot of time to dedicate, and like, most people have somewhat busy lives. They don't wanna be out there running for 5 hours, other than maybe in their marathon. So let's, yeah, think about that too, and how we can maybe make that
Yeah.
a little bit easier. So let's, like, switch a little bit. So,
Well, there's one thing
um
that I wanted to
okay.
mention first is that I can see that there's some potential arguments for splitting it out. So you're going to have
Oh,
some people
yeah.
that are saying, "Well, you don't really know what it's going to be like running for the 20 miles." Valid,
Yeah,
completely
that's
valid.
valid, but yeah.
You also going to have one camp of people that are going to say, "Well, you don't get to know what it feels like to run on fatigued legs, what it's going to feel like later in that race." So there's
Mhm.
two approaches that I could say that we can work on if you want to use this split run approach. You could say, I want to run like I'll use your scenario that you said. Let's run the 16 in the morning and we'll run the four in the evening. All right. So that scenario is going to give you what it's going to feel like to be on your feet for 16 miles.
Right.
Completely reasonable and good experience to draw on during race day. You could also approach it in terms of like, well, let's run uh 6 miles in the morning with some intensity, and now we're going to run the balance, which would be what, 14 miles in the evening.
Yeah.
So, once you
Yeah.
have loaded your system with some intensity in the morning, you're still recovering from that run in the evening. It's not like now he's like, oh, I've got 6 hours, so now I'm fresh. That's absolutely not the case whatsoever.
Right.
So, that kind of scenario is going to kind of
Yeah.
emphasize what it's going to be like to running on tired legs
Yeah. I
because
mean,
you've
I
already
think
you
that's
front loaded
true.
that intensity.
It's hard for me to I'd be like, "Ugh, I wanna get the longer piece in the
It's
morning." It's
hard
a
it's
mental
hard to
piece. It's
execute.
hard to do. It's
Yeah.
hard to execute. But the one thing I was gonna say with that argument of it, I think that 16 miles in the morning and then doing, or whatever, maybe it's 14.6, or so there's some longer piece in there, and
Mhm.
whether it's the way you're doing it, but there is, like, you're recovering just enough that your form will be a little bit, like, just enough that you're
Yes,
not
that's the
totally
key.
deteriorated, and then you're gonna go out, it's not like that 4-mile run after 16 is gonna be, like, fresh as daisies. You're not gonna feel,
Mhm.
like, fantastic. It's gonna feel hard. You're not gonna be,
Yeah.
you haven't had arguably enough time to really recover that it's gonna be, like, a totally fresh run. So it's still gonna be hard, and arguably that 4 miles might be tough mentally too, because you're now having to go back out after doing the long run. So I
Yeah.
can argue push back against that in that way. It just gives you enough time to recover that your form hopefully will be not so deteriorated that you can have good form. And then I just think you really need to make sure during that 4 miles or whatever it is you're doing in the evening, whether you do the 16 early, 6 early and then 14 later, just make sure you are really paying attention to your bodies. Like, are you starting to, like, bend over, or, are you noticing anything about your form, like checking in with your body, kind of doing that, like, check to say, okay, am I upright? How are my arms swinging? Like, how are my legs? Or am I kind of limping along or whatever? So I think that, that's my argument against that, is that no, actually you're not really recovering all that much. It's just a tiny bit to get
Yeah.
you to the point where you can do that remainder of the distance. And so I don't think I I know there are a lot of like diehard. I think there's just unfortunately in the marathon, especially you get a lot of these some of my people I run with sometimes who are just kind of like maybe been in it for a while, just kind of like it's like you've got to do your 20 miler. It's like a badge of honor or something. You can't break it
Yeah.
up. But I think that's baloney. And some of these people also have really like old fashioned ideas of fueling. And I'm thinking, oh, well, it's probably why you struggle, but we'll talk
Yeah.
about that. But anyway, so try it because I think that that's kind of the thing is obviously it's been around a while. If it's been around since the 1960s or 70s, this whole idea of this magical 20 miler. And I think there's now, and it's always been a little bit of pushback with like Hanson's marathon method and Jack Daniels has his own formula to kind of say, hey, we don't actually maybe necessarily need to do that. However, I do want to say, let's switch a little bit to, so we're talking now, I think that really covers like the people who are kind of starting out or maybe they have done marathons, they're a little bit more injury prone, like we're kind of talked a little bit about how we might manage that runner, that triathlete, that Ironman distance person. But what about the I'm thinking selfishly, someone like myself who's been running for a while. I've done, I don't know, what is it, marathons or something, and I have a very specific goal coming up for grandmas. I want to do a PR. Like
Yeah.
this is where I think the nuance, and this is when I looked at that article, I was like, okay, that's great. Like I think that's a good, like maybe we don't need to do 20 miles for a long run for most people. But now what about the people who have like a very fast, like for instance, someone wanting to qualify for the Olympic trials, like that's a very fast person. That person that's quite the accomplishment. That's an amazing accomplishment. And not everybody's going to, but now we're switching to this type of person. They're probably going to be having to do at least one 20 miler. In fact,
Yeah.
during my training, my goal is to do four, at least 20 miles. So this is like a totally different aspect of it. So my past 2 or 3, I've done at least 3, if not close to 4 20-ish milers. So they're anywhere between 19 and 22 miles. And so it's just a totally different beast. You know what I mean? And then that's where it gets a little bit different. And then within that mileage, within those 20 milers, I'm doing at least one that's going to have a significant amount of time, if not like a half marathon distance time at close to marathon pace. So it's just a totally different beast. And so I I think that's where unfortunately a lot of people, I think, because of Strava, because, people follow these people who are, trying to qualify for the Olympic trials or watching their YouTube stuff, that they're doing that, and that's amazing. But their goal is that to run 26.2 miles at, gosh, what, like somewhere between 5:30 and maybe for someone running 3 hours, like 6:50 pace. That's a freaking fast. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's fast. You have and you have to be durable to do that. You have to have, and the risk of injury is high. I'm well aware of that. Like I could be training for this next one and I have a fairly high injury rate because of the amount of volume and the distance I'm trying to complete in the long run, amount of long runs I'm trying to do. So, but what I want to say is like that's a different beast. I think that's okay for that type of individual who's had the
Yes.
experience, who's doing that. They can do that because that 20 miler might be that's less than 3 hours for them. You know what I mean? They're not out there for
Yep.
over 3 hours just slogging away at it usually. And so, but I want to just tell you if you're listening, please, if you're seeing that, don't. I think the problem is then people equate that to like, this is what I need to do. Like, oh,
Yeah.
so and so is running this. Sarah Hall is running this or whatever. She's a great marathoner. She's been around a long time. She's done so many. No, please do not compare yourself to. I have a
Yeah.
hard time doing that sometimes too. But I think I've learned enough. Like, okay, I just want to be like, it's great. I can watch these people do what they're doing. I can see their training and I can be like inspired. But just because you see someone doing one or more than 120 mile, or I've heard of some of those runners doing more than 26 miles, like 27 or something like that, a 27 mile or something. The risk of injury is so high for that. So please don't see that and think that you must follow suit. That's
I'll
my
say it.
thoughts.
I'll say it like this, and this is going to be kind of maybe brutally honest, and it'll probably piss some people off, but I don't
Yeah.
care. These types of athletes, these people are Ferraris. These are high tune
Yeah, I like them
precision
fast.
engines. You, the average person, is the Honda Civic. It's not even close.
Right.
So don't look at a Ferrari and think, well, I need to replicate their training plan, and then you go in with your Honda Civic and Honda Accord and think that you can keep up, because
Uh-huh.
you're not. It's not going to happen. And one thing that I do see a lot is, people are just like, I've ran some 5Ks and I've ran some 10Ks and I've run, a half marathon. I'm ready to run a marathon and I want to qualify for Boston. These are a lot more common than what you would think. And
Uh-huh.
these are those individuals that you really have to be kind of like sit down and just be honest with them and just
Yeah, I
say,
mean, it's possible they could. I mean, you have those outliers of people who are very good.
could you be the exception to the rule and just
May-
be a really gifted athlete?
It's
Absolutely. That could be the case. Could this be like a
yeah.
one-time thing where you say, hey, I did this? But if you're not like a one-time person, we're looking for consistency and replicability
Uh-huh.
and being able to do this over and over and over again and enjoy this
Yeah, I don't want
process.
someone to set
It's
up
not
for
the approach to
disappointment.
use.
Yeah, that's just a
Yeah.
setup for like, I want to qualify for Boston on my first marathon. I think you're setting yourself up a little bit for disappointment. I think, and because you might absolutely, if you're kind of gifted and you have some running background or college running background and you've done, you've kind of proven that you're fast in other distances, but don't set yourself up too. I think maybe that first one should just be like, um, let's just see how it goes, like,
Let's just see how it
I'm like,
goes.
let's see
Yeah.
how this goes. We have some idea of where you want to be, but try not to be so set on something because I'll tell you with my experience in the marathon, it's a beast. It's a beast
It's
of a
hard.
distance and it's
Yeah.
hard and it's harder. It's so different from even an ultra because and when you are trying to qualify for something like Boston, like you got to run that pretty fast, like you got to it's not like just a jaunt in the park like you're just running along. You're trying to kind of scoot along pretty quickly for that distance and things do tend to fall apart for a lot of people, including
Yeah.
myself. I've been there around mile 20 to 22.
Yeah.
So you got to almost kind of just prepare for anything. And then once you have that under your belt and you kind of have that experience, then you're like, okay, I kind of know what this is. You know, let's, that's the fun about it is then it's a, it's like mastering. There's like a sense of mastery to things. I think it's I don't know if you can ever say you've mastered the marathon because I even after all of the ones I've done, I still think I'm learning and trying to figure it out. And so, but it's just a sense of like trying to get it and master it a little bit better the next time. And okay, what did I learn from this experience that I can like change for the next experience? And that's what keeps you in it for the long run. And that's what keeps me showing up every day and training because I am still trying to master this distance. I don't
Yeah.
know if I'll ever actually master the distance, but I'm still trying to do the best I can to figure it out and how to train appropriately so that maybe those last 6 miles I'd like to get to those last 6 miles not feeling totally like I'm just hanging on for dear life at some point,
Yeah.
but it's a beast. So just keep that
I
in
mean,
mind.
we
It's
never
fun.
even talked about the whole fueling side of it. We've only
Yeah,
talked
but we
about kind
won't.
of like the aerobic side, which is that's only a
Right.
piece of the puzzle.
Well, we
How,
have I mean, we gotta talk yeah, that's a whole other topic
that's a
is just the
whole
fueling
different can of
side of it,
worms.
yeah, and that would be something I would be happy to we could definitely do a whole topic of just train and it would almost be like the fueling specifically for a marathon itself. Maybe one where
Or
I
just
mean,
fueling
I'm
for these long
for any long distance
efforts.
race, but yeah.
Whether, how do
I
I
mean,
fuel? What are the different fueling strategies
we
that I
did
should be using for my long runs in
yeah.
preparation for my race?
We did
Those
a little bit of
those
that,
are a
and we had
bunch
a
of things.
topic, but it wasn't, it was kinda just like a fueling I'm trying to remember, it was early on, but I
It's
think
like
that would be
fueling
something
for
we
race day strategies is
yeah,
one thing that
but I
one of the
think
early
almost like
episodes.
doing another fueling episode on just the, like yeah, like diving into it a little bit more, and I almost think in the fueling situation, it would almost make sense if forming a race day fueling strategy was like our second episode, but I think we could almost have a series of how would you fuel for like half marathon to marathon versus like an ultra is almost two
Yeah.
different situations. So that would almost warrant two different, or even an Ironman versus, almost two or three different scenarios there. Because even in an Ironman, there's different things you kind of consider for that because you're riding your bike. You're not able to really fuel during the swim. So we could almost have three full episodes
I
on
mean, yeah,
those. Yeah.
there's a completely, even though a full Ironman has a marathon in it, the approach that I would use for long run training would be very different for somebody who is a multi-sport athlete like an Ironman versus somebody who I'm training just is single sport, just a runner. And
Right.
so, the way that we've approached this topic has primarily been from a single sport perspective. But
Hmm.
maybe another episode coming forward was like, okay, well, then now let's extend the conversation of the importance and role of the long run, but look at it in terms of from the multi-sport athlete,
Right.
because
Because
the
that would
approach
be
can be very
like
different.
different. Yeah. I think that's true. Because this was kind of like running fundamentals, but I think having a whole conversation for, yeah, multi sport is because it is different. We're going to have,
Yeah.
because you have the three sports, you're trying to recover from. So it's not just like the running, which is its own. But yeah. Yeah. So we have a few different, I think at least two, maybe three fueling episodes just specific. And
Yeah.
then maybe one also like, long run episode specific to multi sports. I feel like I need to write these down so we remember. But we always thinking
I,
of
s-
new things to talk
yeah.
about.
So I think we've covered this probably the best that
Yeah.
we possibly can without
I mean,
making this thing like a
in the show
6-hour
notes,
podcast.
I'll
So
I'll link to some articles on it and the Hansons if I can find specific. Like obviously, you can buy Jack Daniel's book and
yep.
kind of look into those. I recommend that. They just, if anything, just reading about different philosophies on training and stuff. But I'll link to what I can find on this so you can explore that a little bit more too, in the show notes if you haven't already come across either Jack Daniels or the Hanson marathon or
Yeah.
the method there. Yep.
All right. I think that's a wrap for today. We can obviously extend this and talk about other offshoots of this particular topic where we've talked about the importance and the role of the long run within your training plan, regardless of whether you're kind of like a single sport or a multi-sport athlete. This has been episode 65, the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Well, I want to thank every one of you for tuning in and the continued support that you show the podcast. Again, if you are enjoying the content and you find this stuff informative and helpful to you, please consider leaving a comment and a review on whatever platform it is that you're consuming your podcast materials from. Those are greatly appreciated, and we thank you. Also wanted to reiterate, we do have a YouTube channel for the podcast as well. So if you're listening to your podcast on like Spotify or Amazon or whatever, we do host the video from every episode on the YouTube channel. So if you'd like to see
I want to
us,
see our beautiful faces.
if you want to see us face to face
There
or
you go.
screen to face, feel free to check that out as well. I've seen people leave a couple comments from YouTube versions of episodes, and we do monitor those on a regular basis. If you would like to reach out to us through the podcast, you can use our email address. So it's theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. That email is monitored daily. And again, check out the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group on Facebook. Answer one simple question. We'll let you right on in and enjoy some of the additional content that's coming out through that medium. So again, thank you so much, guys, for joining us on episode 65 in our mastering the fundamentals of running, the role of the long run. So
Yeah.
thank you, guys, and stay warm this weekend. Well, it's probably February by the time you're listening to it, but you'll still need to stay warm anyway. So February's still cold. All right, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Bye, Katie. That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularacing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.